You are listening to Facts Fiveum, containing 1/5 of your daily dose of facts. This is Facts Fiveum Episode 1. Today we will be diving into an infamous flyer from the archives of the John Birch Society. The approximate date of this flyer is sometime in the mid-1960s, likely 1963. The John Birch Society is an organization that somehow still exists. They're infamous for calling just about everything a communist plot to overthrow the US of A. And one of their more infamous examples was the Civil Rights Movement. Of course, I'd say it's a type between this and calling Dwight Eisenhower a communist plot to overthrow the USA. I don't know which is more infamous. I will say the Dwight Eisenhower one is much funnier, and this one is just much more insulting. Now, before I get too smug and say, this is what conservatives thought of the Civil Rights Movement, I should be fair and add a disclaimer. The John Birch Society, during their heyday, were almost universally reviled. William F. Buckley, one of the most influential conservative intellectuals of his day, even went out of his way to not only denounce the John Birch Society, but to also call for them to effectively be purged from the ranks of the American conservative movement, because their paranoia and conspiracism contributed nothing good to it. And one more important disclaimer. The language in this flyer is bigoted, outdated, and just insulting. I want to capture the nastiness that the John Birch Society had towards the Civil Rights Movement, so I will do my best to read it and comment it as is. However, if this makes you uncomfortable, I completely understand, and I suggest you refrain from watching or listening. If you want me to make a version that cuts out some of the more objectionable language, leave a note in the comments and I may just get around to it. Without further ado, let's dive into this monstrosity. What's wrong with civil rights? What's wrong with civil rights? The answer is nothing, but there is a great deal wrong with what is being done today in the name of civil rights. Let's begin this brief survey with two basic premises. Number 1. There are injustices to our Negro citizens still prevalent in some places, and they should be eliminated. Number 2. A huge majority of the American people of both races, who now give their moral support to the Civil Rights Movement, are good people with idealistic motives, and excellent intentions must be realized. But let's put both of these observations in proper perspective, and in doing so, let's bring some hard truths and plain common sense to bear on a very tricky subject. For it is stupid to sink a great ship because it has a few dirty splotches that need cleaning, and unless there is a better and more rapid understanding of what is really taking place, the communists are going to sink our whole ship of state under the excuse that they're trying to wash away the dirt. Okay, I want to stop here, because if you are concerned, you have every right to be. It's only going to get far, far worse from here. Part 1. The Exaggerated Problem. The communists themselves have repeatedly emphasized that the American Negroes should supply the leadership for Negro participation everywhere in the worldwide revolution, because the Negroes in the United States are so much better off than those anywhere else in the world. But the truth goes much further. A. The average American Negro has a tremendously higher material standard of living than Negroes anywhere else, and a far higher, in fact, than at least 4/5 of the Earth's population of all races combined. As Herbert Hoover pointed out a decade ago, the 15 million Negroes then in the United States owned more automobiles than all of the 150 million Negroes in Africa and the 150 million white people in Russia put together. Now that's a classic talking point. Oh yes, you don't live in a second or a third world country. You have first world problems. I swear, I can just imagine these guys, walking up to a fountain where African Americans are being brutalized and be like, compared to Africa, you guys have it good. Paragraph B. The average American Negro not only has a far higher standard of literacy and better educational opportunities than Negroes anywhere else, but a higher level of literacy, in fact, than the average for all races on at least 4/5 of the earth. It has been pointed out, for instance, by many authorities, that a far larger percentage of all American Negroes receive college educations than the percentage of all Englishmen who do so. You know what? Let me just check something real fast. Okay. So yeah, George Wallace infamously stood in front of the University of Alabama on June 11th, 1963. I do not know if this was published prior to that infamous event, but at the same time you have to be just extremely idiotic to look at stuff like that, looking at school segregation in the 60s and be like, you know, at least you're not British. For a bunch of guys who call themselves patriots, they're like, oh yes, you know, you have it better than the nation we literally fought a war against to get away from. How low are these freaking standards, man? Anyway. C. The average American Negro has complete freedom of religion, freedom of movement, and freedom to run his own life as he pleases. This is like 1963. I mean, lynchings were on their way out, but they were still happening. Like, the last lynching happened in 1981. That's a not-so-fun fact. It was either 1981 or 1980. Okay, hang on, I have to get through the paragraph. His security of person and assurance of honorable treatment by his fellow citizens and all of the utilitarian relationships of living have been exactly on par with those of his white neighbor. Oh God. Who wrote this? Like, I mean, how tone deaf do you... Have these people never met a black person in their life? Like, this is the 1960s when, like, everyone was like, oh yeah, we really need to do something about this. But seriously, like, oh God. Gotta finish the paragraph. The environment for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness enjoyed by the American Negro has been far superior to that of any race or any people among at least 90% of the Earth's population. No, I mean, that's a very high percentage, and I don't know how to disprove that. Or even prove it. D. So what is all of the complaining about? Basically, the answer is very simple. It is through the opportunities originally provided by the economic enterprise of the American whites through emulation by the American Negro of his white neighbor's ways and... Oh God, this is just getting uncomfortable to read. And through a gradual adoption and absorption of the various spiritual, material, and political elements of the white American's culture. Oh my God. That the American Negro has been able, in a brief 100 years, to raise himself to this level so far above the vast body of mankind. Yeah, I'm just gonna go bang my head against the wall real fast. This is the really insulting stuff. Hang on, just give me a moment. Thank you very much for waiting. Okay, I can get through this. With the inevitable result, under the circumstances, that he has not yet achieved a par with the very leadership he was emulating, and that there still remains differences as a general rule in the economic, literate, and social levels of the two races. These differences, and the natural or human natural results of these differences, although they had been steadily and peacefully diminishing everywhere, peacefully diminishing. You know, as I record this, it's almost the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Riot, also known as the Tulsa Massacre, or the bombing of Tulsa. It's one of the most infamous massacres in U.S. history, in which one of the most prosperous, African-American districts in the entire USA was completely and utterly destroyed in a massive riot and or massacre and or bombing. In the case of the bombing, it was rather that it was just after World War I, and there were a lot of military surplus planes, and some show-offs decided to flex their muscle by literally just flying some of them and dropping some payloads on the African-American districts of Tulsa. Now, that would have been 43 years prior to this being written. That's not to mention the other many, many riots that had been taking place up until then. Moral of the story is, holy fuck, is this out of touch? That's not even ignoring the past, that's just ignoring the present. I mean, I get it, the long, hot summer of 67 didn't happen yet, but it's still just ignoring the present. There was the infamous Cicero race riot, which is probably one of my favorite race riots, and I use the term favorite loosely, if only because of how absurd it is. In the area of Cicero, Illinois, in, I believe, 1951, what happened was a single apartment building rented a single apartment to a single black family, and that is quite literally the cause of the race riot. Cicero race riot. Anyway, just gotta get through this. Alright, these was, diminishing everywhere, still very tremendously in different parts of our country, and the agitators behind the civil rights movement demand that a complete and absolute disregard of those differences, and a pretense that they do not exist. Wait, hang on. And the agitators behind the civil rights movement demand that a complete and absolute disregard of those differences, and a pretense that they do not exist, must be forced upon by federal law upon the total population everywhere, and with respect to every activity of human life. Okay, that is very confusing. So, wait, hang on. And the agitators behind the civil rights movement demand that a complete and absolute disregard of those differences, and a pretense that they do not exist, must be forced by federal law upon the total population everywhere, and with respect to every activity of human life. Okay, so these guys are saying that the radical civil rights activists are trying to force a regime of informal color blindness on every aspect of life. These agitators themselves know, of course, that any such accommodation by law and force is impossible, which is probably why they were not advocating for it. And again, I don't expect the John Birch Society to be historically accurate, or even accurate to the present. And it is the last thing in the world that they would really want today. Why do they start so many sentences with "and"? That's the second time they've done it this paragraph. You really shouldn't do that. In fact, as was emphasized by that truly great Negro American Manning Johnson out of his personal knowledge, the communists have, for decades, done everything they could to prevent Negro progress and thus maintain these differences as a grist for their mill. And for anyone at home confused, Manning Johnson was an African-American member of the American Communist Party, or CPUSA. He later turned state's evidence and became an informant against the Communist Party. He died, I believe, let me check, in 1959, shortly before this direct was published. What the agitators want is the turmoil they can bring about by the increasing stringency of their demands. As J. Edgar Hoover has wisely pointed out, the communists have no slightest interest in really improving the lot of the American Negroes, but only in using the Negroes and the racial problem to promote communist purposes. Honestly, that should tell you just how smooth the brains of the John Birch Society are, because they're talking about how, they want to use the feds to, police everyone in everyday life, and then they're like, but man, isn't that J. Edgar Hoover awesome? It's literally in the same paragraph. Well, yeah, let me check. Yeah, that is literally the same paragraph. Punishment by law and force. Also, J. Edgar Hoover, the guy who wants to use punishment by law and force on the federal level to affect just about everyone he doesn't like. Anyway, part 2. The drastic remedy. I really shouldn't be rolling my R's. For the civil rights movement in the United States, with all of its growing agitation and riots and bitterness and insidious steps towards the appearance of a civil war. Ooh, wait, here it comes. Now, any of you who might have a cursory knowledge of the John Birch Society, you might have heard of this quote. Well, here it is. Has not been infiltrated by the communists, as you now so frequently hear. It has been deliberately and almost wholly created by the communists, patiently building up to this present stage for more than 40 years. So, let me think for a second. So 40 years would have been 1923. So, I mean, actually, if they're saying more than 40 years, they're probably trying to say ever since the start of the Russian Revolution, which would have been about 40-ish years prior to the publication of this. But at the same time, I really have to comment on, well, the all-too-familiar refrain that I'm sure many of you have heard today, namely that any social movement that is trying to extend rights to another group of people, they're not legit. They're actually a communist or Marxist or leftist front trying to destroy America. Some things never change, eh? Alright. The record to support this statement is absolutely clear to anybody who will take the trouble to study honestly and objectively the history of communist activities. Oh God. They're doing that same shit. It's like, no, you see, we're objective and honest. And if you're objective and honest like us, you can see the truth that it's actually a commie plot. Okay, let's back to the sentence. The record to support this statement is absolutely clear to anybody who will take the trouble to study honestly and objectively the history of communist activities with regard to what they early named. Early? Is that like a 1960s? I never noticed that one before. No, the American Negro Problem. In this long endeavor, the communists have faithfully followed two of their major and time-tested formulas. A. First is the formula known as anticolonialism. This begins with the basic pretense that communism is an uprising of the downtrodden masses against powerful bosses who exploit them. This premise, in turn, is 100% falsehood. Communism is entirely an effort of self-perpetuating clique of international gangsters, usually out of the very top economic, educational, and political circles of each country, to impose their tyranny rigidly and completely on the whole world. Oh my fucking god. You swap communism with globalism and you get you get basically Alex Jones. Granted, it's no mystery he was inspired by the John Birch Society. But, it's basically the same shit. It's basically, actually, the radical left is a worldwide movement funded by some of the best, well-connected, wealthiest individuals in the entire world, and they are conspiring to have a unified movement to destroy the country. My God. Okay. Derived from this fundamental big lie is the theme of anti-colonialism. Its specific core of falsehood has been the colonial peoples of Asia and Africa wanted and deserved their independence from the nations of Europe which were oppressing and exploiting them. This is not going to be good. Like what they're saying, I know it's going to get... It doesn't take a genius to figure out it's going to get much, much worse. Actually, by 1920, the French in Indochina, which is nowadays known as Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia, that area, or Algeria, the Dutch in Indonesia, and the Belgians in the Congo and the other imperialistic powers were giving their colonial subjects a very enlightened and benevolent rule indeed. Give me a second. I just gotta scream into a pillow right now. Just hold tight.
What the fuck? I mean, oh my fuck! What's that a good idea? This is about a lot of editing, and it doesn't look like a print. Oh God!
Oh my God! Thank you for waiting. I mean, They were gradually raising the standard of living, the level of education, the exercise of individual freedom and responsibility, and the participation of the natives in their own local governments as rapidly as these advances of civilization could be absorbed. You know, I'm honestly just... I'm not even mad at this point, I'm just confused. Like, this legit reads like some sort of, old, like some sort of 1880s British imperialist who's like, oh yes, those savages down in the Indies, oh, they have some spices, so we gave them some civilization. Oh, yes, give me those spices. But at the same time, like, they talk about how, like, in other stuff, they'll talk about how patriotic they are, and, like, we're a country that fought back against the British imperial machine. Well, I really shouldn't have... I expected this to make a bit too much sense, I guess. This process was not primarily the result of altruism. It developed automatically from a realistic self-interest and from the commercial progress in colonial areas which was being promoted by the pioneers from the mother countries. But as a consequence of the total forces at work, the natives were coming more and more to regard themselves as loyal members of those great empires which Paris or Brussels or The Hague might be the capital. There was no more spontaneous demand for natural desire for independence among any of those colonial peoples in 1920 as there was among American Negroes in 1955. Okay. Like, earlier on they talk about how, oh, you got the bad commies who are trying to force themselves onto the world. And then they're also like, oh yeah, that the colonists, they liked it when another country forced themselves upon them. I know I'm looking too much into this. This is just Drek, but this is the John Birch Society. But like, how? Like, it's not even one of those things that you really have to think about very much. It's practically on the same page. Like, how do you... Like, this... I know the guy who wrote this and edited this is probably dead at this point, but, like, how do you come to that at all? Anyway. So the communists had to create in each colony the appearance of such a demand and the semblance of a civil war on behalf of independence. I wonder what these guys would have thought of Gandhi. They have done so in one colonial area after another, through terrorizing enough natives, by atrocities and massacres, into supporting or appearing to support communist guerrilla leaders in their clamor for independence. Eventually, in this way, the synthetic and prolonged civil war could furnish the excuse for communists in the top circles of various governments and the United Nations to negotiate the colony into independence, always as a transition stage towards its becoming a colony of the Soviets. And probably more, hundreds of thousands of innocent human beings have been brutally tortured and murdered as a means of creating this appearance of a native civil war for independence than for any other purpose in human history. I can just imagine, like, you're some Indian dude and you're starving because the British need more food, and you're like, the commies, this is the communists' fault. Because, that's what's going on in the John Birch Society's head, I guess. Anyway, the final step in this development, which really brings it home to ourselves, is the concept apparently originated by Stalin, that the Negroes in the southeastern United States could be treated as an oppressed colony, with the same agitation among them on behalf of their independence and self-determination. Wait, I'm a bit confused. Like, wasn't Stalin all about socialism in one country or something? Oh, whatever. This line was officially laid down in 1928 in a communist pamphlet called American Negro Problems, which was written and distributed as instructions to the American communists by Stalin's agent, Joseph Pagenet. Joseph Pagenet. I think that's how you pronounce it. Oh, well. who had earlier been one of the top men in the incredibly cruel but short-lived communist regime in Hungary under Bela Kun. And, oh yeah, so Joseph Pogenet was purged by Stalin, and also, if the thing was published in 1928, Stalin didn't take power for at least a few more years, I recall. Let me double check. I guess, actually no, I guess he was the ruler in 1927, my apologies. I'll leave that as a reminder of my own error. Even I can be wrong. Well, I want to focus on facts here at Facts Fiveum. But at the same time, this is really a stretch. Because one of Stalin's dudes who got purged wrote about issues that black people face in the USA, then that's somehow evidence of this whole civil rights movement being a commie front. And there is almost nothing being done in the whole civil rights movement in America today which is not exactly according with the agitation and propaganda program set forth in that booklet. So, I'm just trying to think what do they ever tell? I don't think they tell you what's actually in that booklet, or at least, whatever. Or at least go into much detail about it. Anyway, B. But a second formula has always been predominant, for in the opening paragraph of the very pamphlet discussed above, establishing the anti-colonialism theme for agitation among the Negroes in America, there was this italicized sentence. The struggle against white oppression of the Negro masses is part of the proletarian revolution in America and against capitalism. So the more general formula at work behind what the communists call their Negro Revolutionary movement is simply the process of adapting every possible bit of agitation and propaganda, even for the most specialized aims, to the service of their general purpose of gradual subversion of the American system, and there it is. Yep, I know I said it before, but I'll say it again. Remember, kids, if there's a movement trying to expand rights to another group of people, it's not a legit movement. It is actually a front by communists or Marxists or leftists who are trying to destroy America. Anyway, the communists soft pedal the theme of Formula A whenever and to whatever extent it might damage the working of Formula B. Wait a second. The communists soft pedal the theme of Formula A whenever and to whatever extent it might damage the working of Formula B? Wait. They soft pedal the theme of Formula A even if it might damage Formula B? I'm legit confused. For every promise to the Negroes, every use made of the racial problem, every iota of bleeding heart sympathy. Bleeding heart. Man, that's a word you don't hear much. That's a term you don't hear much anymore. Sympathy created over supposed or even real injustice to the Negroes. These things are all subservient in communist plans to their one great goal of fastening the police state tyranny of a central government over the American people. And who better to trust than J. Edgar Hoover, probably the closest guy to a centralized police tyrant in the history of the United States. At least we're almost done. Anyway, part 3, an appeal to understanding. The communists say that the exact boundaries of the Negro Soviet Republic... The Negro Soviet... The Negro Soviet Republic... Oh my god! The Negro... Oh my god. Oh my god. The Negro Soviet Republic are undetermined. But that, as announced nearly 40 years ago, it would be certain to include such cities as Richmond and Norfolk, Virginia, Columbia and Charleston, South Carolina, Atlanta, Augusta, Savannah, and Macon, Georgia, Montgomery, Alabama, New Orleans, and Shreveport, Louisiana, Uh, Little Rock, Arkansas, and Memphis, Tennessee. They make clear that this promise of liberation to the Negroes is simply one of the means of Sovietizing all of what is now the United States. A careful study quickly reveals that every part of the civil rights program has been designed and is being carried forward as a step in the communist strategy for these purposes. Yes, a step forward. And the current leaders of the nationwide civil rights campaign have such extensive records of affiliating with communists, of hiring communists, of being guided, trained, and supported by communists, and of themselves supporting communist agents and causes as to make their real purposes as obvious as sunshine to anyone who will simply use honestly the intelligence that God gave him. The same intelligence will also grasp that the American Negroes as a whole did not plan this, have not wanted any part of it, and are no bigger dupes in yielding to the propaganda and coercion of the com-simps. Okay, that's an awkwardly placed S. Com-simps among them than are the white people of the United States in swallowing the portions of that propaganda which are labeled idealism. The communists could never take over one nation after another, with only about 3% of the population belonging to the conspiracy, as they repeatedly do, and by using the same formulas over and over, unless they could deceive huge segments of the other 97% into doing most of their many different jobs for them. Everything's a commie plot. Civil rights is a perfect example of communist strategy and communist tactics as work. So far, successfully in making an anti-communist people help to fasten the tiny but almost infinite chains of a central communist tyranny around their bodies and their lives, and we think it is time for our fellow citizens, white and black, throughout the whole United States to wake up to the real meaning of what is happening all around us. For it is not too late, with sufficient understanding, to restore order and goodwill and the governmental principles of our once great republic, and the gradual progress we had been making before the communists began their insidious destruction towards a still better framework for human life on the part of individuals of all races, colors, and creeds than man has ever achieved before. Thank you for your patience. I know this is very, very... It sucks. Like seriously. Who wrote this? Like, how do you write something so bad? Like, it doesn't... I know I've said this before, but, like, it's just bad. Like, it's so bad, I don't think I'm even going to edit this, because I don't know how else to properly express just how bad it is. Like, these guys are still around. And the worst part is, like, this rhetoric, this rhetoric that was once fringe, it was hated, it drove William F. Buckley to say, like, oh, the John Birch Society, they suck. Like, this type of shit is commonplace now. Oh, yes, you want to advocate for gay people? That sounds like something a Marxist would do. Good grief. Well, this has been episode 1 of Facts Fiveum. Feel free to comment, like, subscribe, and if I ever feel like making an episode 2, I will. Stay factful.